9 years of silence. One collision in a rain-soaked lobby. And the most dangerous man on the Pacific coast is now sleeping 30 feet from the sun he doesn't know exists. If you've been waiting for a story that will wreck you slowly, this is it. Watch until the very end. Hit like if this pulls you in, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since noon and showed no intention of stopping. Maeve Holloway stood behind the front desk of the Tidewatch Inn with a damp dish towel over her shoulder and a pencil behind her ear that she kept forgetting was there. The reservation ledger was open in front of her, though she wasn't reading it. She was listening to the storm work itself against the window panes, that old familiar percussion, the kind that made the walls of the inn feel thinner than they actually were. The Tidewatch sat at the edge of a bluff on the Oregon coast, 7 miles north of a town called Crestfall, which itself was small enough that strangers were noticed and remembered. The inn had 12 rooms, a dining area that smelled permanently of chowder and wood smoke, and a wraparound porch where, on clear evenings, guests would sit with their wine and watch the Pacific pretend to be peaceful. In the off-season, which stretched from October through most of March, the place ran half-empty at best. Maeve kept it going through sheer stubbornness and a reluctance to examine what she would do with herself if it closed. She had bought it at 23 with money that wasn't entirely hers, from a woman named Eunice Pell who'd run the place for 40 years and was finally ready to die somewhere warm. The deal was informal, the paperwork barely legal, and the roof had leaked in 3 places when Maeve first walked through. None of that had mattered. What mattered was that it was remote, that the nearest highway was a 20-minute drive, and that nobody in Crestfall had ever heard of her before the day she arrived with a 7-month pregnancy and a single duffel bag. That was 8 years ago. Noah was in the dining room now doing homework at table 4 with his sneakers propped up on the chair across from him, which she'd told him not to do at least 40 times. She could see him from the desk if she leaned slightly to the left. He had her coloring, the dark hair, the pale skin, but there was something else in him that she didn't let herself look at directly. The particular way he held his jaw when he was concentrating, the stillness in his eyes when something surprised him. She didn't look at that. The front door opened. The wind came in first, carrying the smell of salt and cold rain, and something underneath it she couldn't name. Then 2 men entered, and Maeve straightened instinctively, not because of anything she could have articulated, but because the body sometimes knows things before the mind is willing to. The first man was broad and quiet, early 40s, with the kind of watchful blankness that told you he had spent a long time making himself invisible in rooms. He held the door and scanned the lobby in the time it took most people to blink. The second man walked in behind him. Maeve's pencil fell off her ear and hit the floor. She didn't pick it up. Adrian Voss was 35 years old and looked like someone had assembled him to prove a point. 6'2", charcoal suit that somehow remained unwrinkled despite the weather, dark hair cut close on the sides and slightly longer on top. He moved the way certain men moved, not hurrying, not hesitating, each step landing like a period at the end of a sentence. He was looking down at his phone when he walked in. He hadn't seen her yet. Maeve had approximately 4 seconds to decide what to do with the rest of her life. Her body made the choice before she did. She bent, retrieved the pencil, placed it behind her ear, and fixed her face into the expression she had spent years practicing. Neutral, competent, faintly welcoming in the way that professional hospitality required. Her heartbeat was a disaster under her sternum. She kept her hands flat on the ledger. He looked up. The eye contact lasted less than 2 seconds before she glanced down at the reservation log. Checking in? Her voice came out steady. She had not known it could do that. Voss, he said. 2 rooms. She found the name on the page. She had checked him in herself 3 days ago. A phone reservation, a credit card number she'd processed without looking at the name twice because October bookings were rare enough that she didn't ask questions. She had a policy about that. She had a lot of policies, most of them designed around the same central principle. Don't look too closely at anything. Room 7 and room 9, she said, pulling 2 key envelopes from the drawer. Checkout is 11. Breakfast runs 7 to 9:30. There's fresh coffee in the dining room until 10. She slid the envelopes across the desk and kept her eyes on the level of his collarbone. He didn't take the keys. She felt him looking at her. Maeve. The sound of her own name in his voice was something she had not prepared for. She had prepared for other things, had prepared in the abstract for the possibility of this exact scenario, the way you might prepare for a natural disaster you don't actually believe will come. She had thought through what she would say. She had rehearsed a version of cool indifference that had seemed entirely convincing when she practiced it alone in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. None of it was available to her right now. She looked up. His face was the same and completely different, older around the eyes. A scar she didn't recognize along his jaw, faint and silver. The particular way he looked at her, like he was trying to solve something, that was unchanged. "You have me confused with someone," she said. It was a bad lie. They both knew it. He opened his mouth to say something else, and that was when Noah appeared in the doorway to the dining room, backpack over one shoulder, the other strap dragging on the floor. "Mom, I finished the math, but I don't get the reading part. Can you—" He stopped. He looked at Adrian with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who hasn't learned yet to pretend he isn't looking. Adrian went very still. Maeve moved. She crossed around the desk in 3 steps and put herself between them with a hand on Noah's shoulder, turning him gently back toward the dining room. "Give me 5 minutes, bud," she said. "Go back to the table." Noah looked past her at Adrian once more with that unreadable child's assessment. Then he nodded and disappeared. Maeve turned back. Adrian was still looking at the empty doorway where Noah had been. Something had shifted in his expression. Some careful control she recognized as the thing he put on when the world had handed him something he didn't know how to carry. "The keys are on the desk," she said quietly. "Breakfast is at 7. She walked back around to her side of the counter and picked up the ledger and stared at it until she heard him pick up the keys. She heard his footsteps cross toward the hallway. She heard him stop. "How old is he?" She didn't look up. Her chest was a tight fist around everything she'd spent 8 years protecting. 8, she said. The pause that followed lasted long enough to be its own kind of conversation. Then she heard him walk down the hall. She heard the door to room 7 close. She stood there for a long time with the ledger open in front of her, reading the same line over and over without seeing it. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in the owner's quarters off the kitchen and listened to the storm and ran calculations. She had $700 in the checking account, a truck that needed new brake pads, a son who had a book report due Thursday, and a Mafia boss in room 7 who now knew, or had just started doing the arithmetic on, something she had spent the better part of a decade making sure he never found out. At 3 in the morning, she got up and sat at the kitchen table and made herself be rational about it. He could have sent someone. In the last 8 years, if Adrian Voss had truly wanted to locate her, he had the resources to do it in a matter of days. The fact that she was sitting in this kitchen, that Noah had grown up in relative peace, suggested that either Adrian hadn't looked, or had looked and found nothing, or had found something and chosen not to act on it. None of those options made her feel better. They just made the question more complicated. She didn't know why he was here. A reservation at a coastal inn 7 miles from nowhere wasn't the move of a man who knew he was being watched, or who was trying to watch someone. It looked, from the outside, like a man who had needed to stop somewhere and stopped here. That was almost worse. She made coffee at 5 and went over it again and arrived at the same conclusion she'd been arriving at all night. She needed him to leave, and she needed it to happen before Noah started asking questions, which gave her approximately 36 hours before her son's curiosity became a structural problem. Noah had asked about his father exactly twice in 8 years. The first time he was 4, and she told him his father was someone who had loved her but couldn't be with them, which was the version she had constructed to be technically true. The second time he was 6, and she'd said the same thing in different words, and Noah had nodded with that unnerving self-possession of his and gone back to whatever he'd been doing. He didn't push. He read her silences with an accuracy that made her chest hurt. She was going to have to be very careful. At 6:50 the next morning, Adrian came to breakfast. He was the first one in. He took a corner table, the chair against the wall, the seat with sight lines to both the entrance and the hallway, and he ordered black coffee and eggs without looking at the menu, which meant he'd read it the night before. Maeve had a part-time waitress named Donna who worked weekday mornings, and she let Donna take his table without comment. She worked in the kitchen and watched through the pass-through window. He ate slowly. He was reading something on his phone. His second man, she'd learned from the registry that the name given was Thomas Carr, sat at a different table closer to the window, eating faster, watching the parking lot. At 7:15, Noah came down. He went directly to table 4 the way he always did and dropped his backpack with a thud that made the silverware rattle and pulled out his book report with the expression of a person confronting an adversary. Maeve brought him orange juice and toast without being asked. She set it down and ruffled his hair, and she was turning back to the kitchen when she heard the chair scrape. Adrian had moved. He crossed the dining room and stopped at table 4. "Can I sit here?" Noah looked up. "Sure," he said, with the easy generosity of a child who doesn't feel threatened. Maeve's hand tightened on the kitchen door. She watched. Adrian sat across from Noah and looked at the papers spread on the table. "What are you working on?" "Book report," Noah said. "It's about a dog that dies." "Does the dog deserve to die?" Noah considered this with complete seriousness. "No," he said. "But I think the author wanted you to feel bad about it on purpose." Something crossed Adrian's face. "Smart." "My teacher says I overanalyze." "Your teacher's wrong." Noah looked at him for a moment with those steady eyes. "Are you staying here for a while?" "I don't know yet," Adrian said. "Most people who come in October are either hiding from something or trying to find it," Noah said. "That's what my mom says." The pause was brief. "Which one do you think I am?" Noah studied him with that unnerving directness. "I don't know yet either," he said, and turned back to his book report. Maeve retreated into the kitchen and put her back against the cold metal of the refrigerator and breathed. She caught Adrian in the hallway after breakfast. "I need a minute," she said. He stopped, turned. In the narrow corridor with its faded nautical prints and its single overhead light, he looked larger than he had the night before, which wasn't a trick of her imagination. It was the posture, the particular way he occupied space, like a man who'd grown accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. "You can have as many as you need," he said. "I need you to leave." The words came out quieter than she intended. She'd meant them to land harder. "Why?" he said, not challenging, just asking. "Because my son doesn't need—" She stopped, started over. "Because whatever you came here for, this isn't the place." "I came here for a room, Maeve." "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say my name like that." She kept her voice low. The dining room was 20 feet away, and Donna was in there clearing tables. "You want to tell me it's a coincidence that out of the entire Oregon coast you picked this particular inn in this particular town?" "I picked it because it was remote, and the reviews said the owner kept to herself." A pause. "I didn't know it was you." She looked at him. He looked back, and she searched his face for the lie, the way she'd spent years searching her own memory for the moment she should have seen it coming. She found nothing she could name. That was the problem with Adrian. It had always been the problem. He was unreadable in the way that made you want to keep reading. "I'm going to ask you to respect what I've built here," she said. "I'm going to ask you to check out and drive back wherever you came from, and not, 'Someone's been watching you.'" The sentence stopped her completely. She stared at him. "For about 3 weeks," he said. "Rotating vehicles. One parked on the Bluff Road Tuesday night. Another in the lot of the gas station down the highway, which has a clean sightline to your front entrance." He said it the way you'd describe weather. "I noticed it when I pulled in last night." Her mouth was dry. "You're lying." Blue Ford pickup, partial plate 727, registered to a shell company out of Portland. Older model Civic, dark gray, sat at the gas station for 6 hours on Monday. He tilted his head slightly. "You haven't noticed because you're not looking for it. You haven't needed to look for it. Until now." The hallway felt colder than it had a moment ago. "Why would anyone—" She caught herself. The question had too many answers. "I don't know yet," Adrian said, "but I'm going to find out." "That's not—" She pressed her fingers to her temple. "That's not your problem to solve." "No," he agreed, "but it's yours." He stepped past her toward the lobby, then stopped. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said, without turning around. "I'm not here to complicate what you've made. I just need you to understand that whatever's coming your way, it didn't start with me finding you." He walked away. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the storm resume outside, feeling the particular cold that comes not from weather, but from the realization that you have been safe for so long. You forgot that safe isn't the same as protected. The blue Ford pickup was parked on the bluff road that night. She saw it at 9:15 when she went out to bring in the porch furniture before the wind could take it. It was sitting 200 yards back with its lights off. She stood on the porch and looked at it and felt something move through her that was older than fear. Something closer to recognition, the body remembering what the mind has tried to file away. She went back inside and locked the front door and stood in the entryway with her hand on the deadbolt. Then she heard Noah's voice from upstairs. He was reading aloud to himself, which he did when he was winding down, some habit she'd never tried to break because the sound of it had always made the house feel less empty. She stood there and listened to her son read and looked at the locked door and understood for the first time in 8 years that the distance she'd put between herself and Adrian Voss had never been the thing keeping Noah safe. It had just been the thing letting her sleep at night. She knocked on the door to room 7 at 10:30. Adrian opened it before the second knock, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket. A laptop sat open on the small desk behind him with a screen full of what looked like satellite imagery she couldn't make out from the doorway. "The truck is back," she said. "I know." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She didn't move. "I'm not coming in." He looked at her for a moment, then he came out into the hall and pulled the door mostly shut behind him. "I have a man watching the bluff road," he said, "and another in the parking lot. Nobody's getting close to the building tonight." "You stationed men on my property without asking me." "Yes." "You don't get to—" "Maeve." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which was worse somehow than if it had been hard. "I understand you have 100 things to say to me, and most of them are probably true. Say them. But not tonight. Tonight the only thing that matters is that your son is safe in that building. And right now, the most efficient way to guarantee that is to let me work." She hated the logic of it. She hated more that she had knocked on his door because some part of her had known the logic of it before she'd even walked down the hall. "Who's out there?" she said. "Who would be watching me?" He was quiet for a moment in a way she recognized as him deciding how much to say. "There's a man named Roland Mercer," he said. "He was a fixer. Worked for a number of organizations over the years, including mine, for a period of time, before I learned what he'd done." He stopped. "He has reasons to want to eliminate anyone who could connect him to a set of events from 9 years ago." 9 years ago. She looked at him. "He's resurfaced," Adrian said. "I've been looking for him for about 6 months. I think he found you before I did." The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Noah had stopped reading. "What events?" she said. "What events from 9 years ago?" Adrian held her gaze. "The night you disappeared," he said, "and everything that happened before it." Her chest went tight. She had spent 9 years building an explanation for that night. A story in which Adrian had made his choice, had chosen the empire over her, had sent people to tell her to walk away and never come back. It was a story she believed because she had seen the evidence with her own eyes, or what she'd believed was evidence. Photographs. A letter she had been told was in his handwriting. She had believed it because she'd needed to, because the alternative, that it hadn't been his choice at all, was a door she could not afford to open, not with a new life to build and a child on the way and no margin for being wrong. She looked at Adrian Voss in the hallway of her inn at 10:30 on a storm-soaked October night, and she felt that door swing open 1 inch. She pushed it shut. "We'll talk in the morning," she said. "All right." She turned and walked back toward the stairs. She was halfway up when she heard his door close behind her, soft and final, the sound of a man who had learned a long time ago that pressing too hard only broke things. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened to the wind and to the silence from Noah's room. And somewhere below her, in the parking lot she couldn't see from this window, one of Adrian Voss's men stood in the rain and watched the perimeter of the life she had built. She told herself she didn't know how to feel about that. She was lying, And she knew it, and that was the most frightening thing that had happened to her all night. More frightening than the truck on the bluff road. More frightening than Adrian's name on the reservation ledger. More frightening than the look on his face when he'd first seen Noah. What frightened her most was the sensation, faint and unwelcome as a flame in a cold room, of feeling something she had spent 8 years making sure she would never feel again. Something that felt, against every wall she had built to stop it, like relief. At midnight, she heard it. Not the wind, not the house settling. A sound from the parking lot, brief, percussive, swallowed by the storm almost before it registered. Then silence. Then the door to room 7 opened, and she heard Adrian's voice, low and controlled, speaking to someone in the hallway, and she heard the words even through the floor between them. "Lock it down," he said, "all of it. Now." She was already on her feet and moving toward Noah's room when the lights went out. The lights went out all at once. Not a flicker, not a gradual fade, but a clean cut. The kind that meant someone had gone to the breaker box or the line outside. Someone who knew what they were doing and didn't mind announcing it. Maeve had 3 seconds of total darkness, and then her body took over. She moved down the hall by memory, one hand on the wall, counting doors. Noah's room was second on the left. She knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat, without thinking, without needing to. She pushed the door open and crossed to his bed and put her hand on his shoulder before he could wake up fully disoriented and make noise. "Hey," she said, close to his ear. "It's me. Don't talk." He went still immediately. That was the thing about Noah that simultaneously made her proud and broke her heart. He could read urgency the way other kids read picture books. He'd learned it early. He'd learned it from watching her. "Shoes," she whispered. She heard him move in the dark, heard the soft thud of feet hitting the floor, the sound of laces being fumbled with. She moved to the window and looked out. The parking lot below was dark. No movement she could identify. But the truck that had been sitting on the bluff road was gone, and she didn't know if that was better or worse. Her door, the one at the end of the hall, opened. She spun. A narrow beam of light cut across the floor, a phone flashlight held low. Adrian moved through the doorway with Thomas Carr behind him, and she felt Noah's hand find her arm in the dark and grip it. "We need to move to the lower floor," Adrian said. His voice was controlled in a way that she recognized as the opposite of calm. It was control being applied to something that was trying to break out. Away from the exterior walls. "What's happening?" "My man in the lot isn't responding." He was already looking at Noah. "Hey, buddy, we're going to go downstairs, okay? Stay close to your mom." "Okay," Noah said. That was it. No questions. Just a child reading the room and deciding to trust the adult who sounded most certain. They moved. The kitchen was interior, no windows on 2 sides, and that was where Adrian put them. Maeve and Noah at the far end near the walk-in cooler, away from the door. Thomas Carr took a position by the hallway entrance with something in his hand that Maeve didn't look at directly, because if she looked at it, she would have to process it, and she didn't have the bandwidth right now. Adrian was on his phone. She could hear him speaking quietly, but couldn't make out the words. Noah stood pressed against her side with his hand in hers, which he hadn't done since he was 5, and she kept her grip loose so he wouldn't feel how hard she was working to stay steady. The backup generator kicked on after about 4 minutes. It didn't restore the main lighting, just the emergency strips along the floor and the single overhead in the kitchen, which threw everything into a dim yellowish half-dark that made faces look wrong. Adrian came back. 3 vehicles, he said to her low. 2 on the bluff road, 1 just turned onto the inn's access road. They're not moving fast, which means they're not sure what they're walking into. He glanced at Noah, then back at her. "My team is 6 minutes out." 6 minutes, she repeated. "We're fine. Your man in the lot is alive, incapacitated." A pause, brief, controlled. "He's okay." She didn't know if she believed that or if he was managing her. She looked at his face in the yellow light and couldn't tell, and that was its own kind of vertigo. "Who are they?" she said. "Mercer's people? You said he'd resurfaced. You said 6 months ago. Not here." He looked at Noah again. "Not now." She pressed her mouth shut. Noah looked up at Adrian with those leveling eyes. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. Adrian crouched down to his eye level. It was a thing Maeve had never seen him do. Not that she'd seen him around children, not that she'd seen him in any context like this, but there was something in the movement that seemed native to him, unhurried, like he'd done it 1,000 times, and that specific detail drove something small and painful into the center of her chest. "We're going to be fine," Adrian told him. "There are some people outside who don't have good intentions, but there are also people coming who do. Our job right now is just to stay put and stay quiet." Noah considered this. "Are you one of the good people?" he asked. The pause lasted one beat too long. "I'm working on it," Adrian said. Noah nodded like that was a reasonable answer and went back to leaning against Maeve's side. Adrian stood. He and Maeve looked at each other across the kitchen, and the amount of unsaid things in that look was enough to fill the building. His team arrived in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Maeve counted. She heard it from the kitchen, vehicles, multiple, coming fast up the access road. Then voices, brief commands. Then silence, which was somehow more alarming than the noise had been. Thomas' car relaxed slightly, which was the only indication she had that the situation had shifted. Adrian went to the back door and stepped outside for 8 minutes. When he came back, he looked different. Not visibly shaken, more like a man who has received information he'd been expecting and still hadn't wanted to hear. "Clear," he said. "For now." "What does for now mean?" Maeve said. "It means they pulled back when they saw the response. It was reconnaissance." He moved to the kitchen table and sat, and for the first time she registered that he looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from one bad night. The kind that had been accumulating for a long time. They weren't trying to take anyone. They were counting windows. She sat down across from him. She nodded at Thomas Carr, who looked at Noah and seemed to understand that he was wanted elsewhere. He walked out. Noah was sitting on a stool by the cooler, the book report he'd been reading earlier somehow in his hands. He'd grabbed it on the way down without her seeing, which was such a Noah thing to do that she almost wanted to laugh. "Can I read?" he asked. "Yes," Maeve said. He bent his head over the pages. She turned back to Adrian. "Tell me," she said. He told her in pieces, the way you break bad news, not all at once, because all at once would be too much to hold, but in increments, each one giving you just enough time to steady yourself before the next one landed. Roland Mercer, 51. Former intelligence contractor, then private sector, then a career that existed in the space between legal and invisible. He'd worked for Adrian's organization for 2 years, brought in to manage what Adrian called problems, which she understood to mean the kind of problems that couldn't be resolved through conventional channels. What Adrian hadn't known, what he'd spent the subsequent years uncovering, was that Mercer had a practice of manufacturing the problems he was then paid to solve. He identified leverage points, created crises, then positioned himself as indispensable to the resolution. It was a long game. It required patience and a complete lack of anything resembling conscience. 9 years ago, Mercer had identified Maeve as a leverage point, not because of anything she'd done, because of what she represented. A man like Adrian Voss, with an empire built on controlled violence and strategic fear, had exactly one unprotected place. And Mercer had found it, and he'd decided that eliminating it would push Adrian deeper into the organization, more dependent on the people around him, more profitable to manage. She sat very still while he said this. "The photographs," she said, "fabricated. The letter, forged." He said it without flinching. "I've seen the originals. They were good. Good enough that I might not have questioned them either, in your position. And the men who came to the house, the ones who told me to, Mercer's, not mine." He looked at the table. "I spent 3 months after you disappeared trying to understand what I'd done. I went through every conversation, every decision. I couldn't find it." A pause. "It took me 6 months to start looking elsewhere." She sat with that. 8 years. 8 years of a story she had told herself so many times it had calcified into fact. Adrian chose the empire. Adrian sent men to her door. Adrian decided she was expendable. She had built a life on top of that story, had used it the way you use a foundation, had poured everything she had into it because if the foundation was wrong, then everything on top of it was built on air. Why didn't you find me? The question came out harder than she intended. If you were looking, if you had the resources, he hid you well. Adrian's jaw tightened. A missing person who doesn't want to be found and has help covering the trail. He met her eyes. And I didn't have a specific destination. I knew you were alive. I knew you were somewhere on the West Coast. Beyond that, he stopped. Beyond that, you what? She said. I found a lead last spring, he said. A payments trail. Mercer had been paying for monitoring services in this region, social media scrapers, property record searches, things you'd buy if you were looking for someone who'd gone to ground. I followed his search to find yours. She absorbed that. So you didn't find me, she said. You found him looking for me. Yes. And he's been watching me for 3 weeks, and you've been here for 2 days, which means there's a window I don't know about. Yes. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the middle distance. Noah turned a page of his book report. The generator hummed. Outside, somewhere in the dark, men with guns stood in the rain at the edge of her property. What does he want? She said. Silence. Adrian's voice was even. You're a witness to nothing. You don't even know what you witnessed. But Mercer doesn't know that. He spent 9 years building a very particular version of events, and you are the one person whose existence complicated it. He needs you gone. Gone, she repeated. Gone. She looked at Noah. Noah, sensing her gaze, looked up from the pages. He studied her face with that quiet diagnostic accuracy, then went back to reading, satisfied with whatever he'd found there, or tactful enough not to press it. He doesn't know about Noah, she said. It wasn't a question, but she needed to say it out loud. Adrian's silence was a second too long. Her eyes came back to him. Adrian. He found the property registration, he said carefully, which lists one owner and one dependent. The bottom of her stomach dropped out. A dependent, she said. Yes. He knows I have a child. He knows you have a child. The kitchen was very quiet except for the hum of the generator and the sound of the storm working against the windows. Does he know? She couldn't finish it. I don't think he's made that connection, Adrian said. Not yet, but Mercer is thorough, and he's had 3 weeks, and if he hasn't done the arithmetic yet, he will. She understood then, with a clarity that was almost physical, what the people in the cars on the bluff road had been counting. Not just windows, not just exits. They'd been counting people. She put Noah to bed at 1 a.m. in the interior room that had been used for storage, the one with no exterior wall, and she sat on the edge of the cot she'd dragged in and watched him fall asleep with the book report on his chest. She sat there until his breathing slowed and evened, and then she sat there some more because she needed to look at him for a while. He slept the way he always had, without moving, one arm thrown above his head, expression completely unguarded in a way it never quite was when he was awake. He looked younger. He looked like what he was, which was a child who had not yet been asked to carry the specific weight that was currently being assembled for him, and she would do anything she was capable of anything, to keep it from landing on him. She went back out to the dining room. Adrian was at table 4. Thomas Carr was by the front window with one of the other men she hadn't met yet, and the inn had taken on a strange quality. Her small, careful world populated suddenly by people who occupied it differently than guests did, who stood in the corners and watched the door and made the familiar rooms feel like a forward position. She sat across from Adrian. In the morning, she said, I want to know everything. Not the version you've been deciding how much to tell me. Everything. He held her gaze. All right. And then I want to talk about options. There's really only one option right now, he said. You and Noah can't stay here. This is my home. Mercer knows where your home is. So does every person I've met in the last 8 years, and I'm not leaving because of Maeve. His voice didn't rise. It just settled, quiet and very final. You have a child. He has a specific father. When Mercer finishes the arithmetic, this will stop being about surveillance and start being about leverage. And leverage with a child in the picture looks nothing like what happened last night. He paused. I need you to understand that. She understood it. That was the problem with understanding things. It didn't make them easier to sit with. Where? She said. I have a place outside Portland. Secure. Staff who know how to manage a situation like this. Staff? She repeated flatly. People I trust. Right. She looked at the table. You understand that I haven't trusted anything you've said in 9 years, and you're now asking me to trust you with my son's location. Yes, he said. That's what I'm asking. And you think that's reasonable? No, he said. I think it's necessary. They sat with that. Outside, the storm had begun to ease. She could hear it in the quality of the rain, shifting from the hard horizontal kind to something softer, almost apologetic. The ocean would be calmer by morning. She knew this coast the way she knew her son's sleeping face, by repetition, by necessity, by all the years of learning what she had to pay attention to in order to survive. What happened to the man outside, she said. The one who was incapacitated. Concussion. He's being treated. A pause. He's 23. She looked at him. He's been with me for 2 years, Adrian said. His name is Kevin. He wanted to be a paramedic before he made a different set of choices. He said it without self-excuse, just laying it out, something in his voice that was neither pride nor shame, but some territory between them. Most of the people who work for me are like that. People who got to a fork in the road and took the wrong one. Like you, she said. Yes, he said. Like me. She didn't say anything to that because there wasn't anything to say that didn't open a much larger conversation than she had the capacity for at 2 a.m. I need to know about Mercer, she said. You said you've been looking for him for 6 months. You don't have him, which means either you can't find him or he's better at this than you. Both, Adrian said. He spent 30 years building infrastructure for exactly this scenario. An exit strategy complicated enough that following it would take longer than he'd need to rebuild somewhere else. He's patient. He'll wait until the odds shift. How do you shift the odds? I reduce the number of things he's waiting for. He met her eyes across the table, which starts with getting you somewhere he doesn't know about. And then what? Wait in Portland while I find him. He said it simply. Yes. And you're confident you can do that. I'm confident it's the only viable path. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. You understand that the last time I trusted you to handle something, I spent 8 years. That wasn't me, he said, very quiet. That was him. The silence stretched between them and had weight. She thought about the truck on the bluff road. She thought about the word dependent on a property registration. She thought about Noah asking Adrian whether he was one of the good people, and Adrian saying, I'm working on it, and the way Noah had accepted that without hesitation in the way that children sometimes understand things that adults spend years refusing to. I want to see them, she said. The letters, the ones you said you wrote. His expression shifted, something that moved through him and was gone quickly. Yes, he said. I'll get them. He went to his room and came back in 3 minutes with a manila envelope thick with paper, and he set it on the table between them and didn't say anything else. She pulled the envelope toward her. She looked at the top of it. The flap was open. She didn't open it. Not tonight, she said. All right. I need it. She stopped, started again. I need to not know those things tonight because if I read them tonight, I won't be able to think clearly in the morning, and I need to be able to think clearly in the morning. You understand? Yes, he said. There's a room off the kitchen that nobody's using, she said. It has a cot and a space heater and not much else. Thomas can have room 9. Your other men. I'll sort it. She stood. She picked up the envelope. She held it against her chest for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was the weight of everything that had been written toward her across 8 years of wrong information and missed connections and a careful, patient man who had decided that her grief was a tool. Adrian, she said. He looked up. If I read these and they're not what you say they are, then you'll know, he said. And I won't argue with you. She nodded once. She walked toward the kitchen. She was at the door when she heard the phone in his pocket vibrate, And then she heard him answer it. And then she heard the silence on his end that lasted 2 seconds, 3, 4. The kind of silence that meant whoever was talking on the other end was saying something that required very careful receiving. Then she heard him say, "When?" And then, "How did he get that?" And then nothing for a long time. She turned around. His face was the particular color of a man who has just been told that the thing he feared most has already happened. "What?" she said. Not a question, a demand. He lowered the phone. "Mercer knows," he said. She already knew what the next words were going to be. She could feel them coming the way you feel weather. "He knows about Noah," Adrian said, "and he knows who Noah's father is." The envelope in her arms suddenly felt like it weighed nothing at all, like paper, like 8 years of letters that had never arrived, like everything that had been building toward this moment since the night she'd run and believed she was running away from Adrian instead of toward whatever was waiting for her on the other side of it. She looked at the man across the room from her, the man she had buried in her memory and lit a match to and told herself she was done with. And she understood, with the particular clarity of a moment that you will remember for the rest of your life, that there was no version of the next morning in which any of this stayed manageable. Mercer knew. Mercer had a name and a child and a coastline, and 3 weeks of surveillance data, and the patience of a man who had been playing long games since before Maeve had understood that games like this existed. And the door she had been keeping shut for 8 years had just been kicked open from the outside. She moved first. That was the thing she would remember later. Not Adrian's face when he said it, not the sound of the storm easing outside, not even the specific cold that moved through her when the words landed. What she would remember was that she moved first, before he could say anything else, before the moment could calcify into the kind of helplessness that killed people. She crossed the kitchen and went to the storage room door and opened it. Noah was asleep, one arm above his head. Book report on his chest, rising and falling. She stood in the doorway and looked at him for exactly 5 seconds. Then she pulled the door shut and turned around, and Adrian was right there, close enough that she had to stop short, and she put one hand flat on his chest and pushed, not hard, just enough to make him take a step back and give her the air she needed to breathe in. "How?" she said. "How does he know?" "I don't have that yet." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." He kept his voice low. Behind him, Thomas Carr was on his own phone, turned toward the wall, shoulders tight. "Someone talked, or Mercer's intelligence on the property registration was deeper than I thought, or—" He stopped. "Or what? Or there's a leak inside my team." The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at Thomas Carr's back, then back at Adrian. "Inside your team," she said. "The team that is currently inside my building." "I know. You know." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, took it away. "How many people knew where you were going? How many people knew you'd found me?" His jaw tightened. 6. 6 people. "Yes." "And you trust all 6 of them?" The pause before he answered was the answer. She walked to the kitchen counter and gripped the edge of it with both hands and stared at the tile backsplash and made herself think, not feel. She could feel later, in some theoretical future where they were on the other side of this. Right now she needed to think. Mercer knew Noah existed. Mercer now knew, or was actively calculating, who Noah's father was. Which meant that within a window she couldn't precisely measure, Noah stopped being background information and became the most valuable piece of leverage in a 9-year-old game. "We're leaving tonight," she said. "Yes." "Not Portland." A beat. "Why not Portland?" She turned around. "Because 6 people knew where you were going, and one of them told Mercer you'd found me. If that person knows about the Portland location, it's secure. It was secure. Before one of your 6 people started talking." She watched his face process that. "You're not taking my son somewhere that a traitor in your organization has a map to. Tell me I'm wrong." He didn't. "Where then?" he said. "I have somewhere." She was already moving, going to the door of the owner's quarters, the small room off the kitchen where she kept the things that mattered. "Give me 10 minutes. Maeve, 10 minutes, Adrian. Watch the building." She went in and closed the door. Washington. The room was small and smelled like cedar and old paper. She'd kept it this way deliberately. Nothing that belonged to the inn, only the things that belonged to her life before and after, and in the margins of it. A lockbox under the loose board below the window, a go-bag behind the winter coats in the closet, repacked every 6 months, a habit she'd built in the first year after arriving in Crestfall, and never let herself drop no matter how safe things felt. She pulled the bag out now and set it on the bed and unzipped it without ceremony. 2 sets of clothes for her. 2 for Noah. Cash, $4,000 in small bills. A burner phone still charged, she checked it twice a year. Documents, copies of Noah's school records, his medical file, both their identification. A knife she'd bought from a hunting supplies store in her second year here, which she'd practiced with until the weight of it felt ordinary. She packed the knife last. Then she opened the lockbox and took out the single item she kept there, a slip of paper with a handwritten phone number and the name Deb written above it. Deborah Kwan. A woman Maeve had met at a farmer's market in Crestfall 3 years ago, retired, formerly employed by a federal agency she'd been circumspect about naming, who lived on 40 acres in the Coast Range, and who had told Maeve, over coffee and unexpected candor, that her door was open if Maeve ever found herself needing somewhere that didn't exist on any map that mattered. Maeve had never asked how Deb knew to offer that. She hadn't needed to. She picked up the burner phone, put in the number, and sent a single text. "Coming tonight. 2 of us." The response came in under 2 minutes. "Gates open." She went back to the kitchen. Adrian looked at the go-bag. He looked at her face. He didn't ask about the bag or where she'd gotten it or how long it had been sitting behind those coats. He just said, "How far?" "An hour and 20 minutes. Off-grid enough that the only way to find it is if someone tells you where it is." She met his eyes. "And the only people who know are me, the woman who owns it, and now you. If Mercer finds that location, I'll know exactly where the leak is." His expression moved through something she didn't have a name for. "All right," he said. "You're not coming," she said. "I know." That surprised her. She'd braced for the argument. "Thomas stays with you," he said. "He's the one person I'm certain of. I've known him since we were 18, and if he'd wanted to sell me out, he had better opportunities than this." He paused. "I'll take the others and go north. Make noise. Give Mercer something to track that isn't you." "And Noah," she said. Not a question, just needing to say it. "And Noah." She looked at him for a long moment in the bad kitchen light. "And you," she said. "What happens to you?" "That's not the priority right now. I'm making it one." He looked mildly surprised by that. She was mildly surprised by it herself. "I'll be fine," he said. "That's not an answer either." "It's the best one I have." He looked toward the storage room door, and the look on his face was the same look she'd seen in the lobby 2 days ago when he'd watched Noah walk away. Something careful and large being held very still. "Take care of him," he said. "That's all." She wanted to say something to that. She had no idea what. 8 years of constructed narrative in one envelope of unread letters, and a man who had just offered to walk into Mercer's sightline to give her son time to get clear, and she had no available language for any of it. "We'll leave in 20 minutes, she said. He nodded. He went to coordinate with his men. She went to wake Noah. Noah didn't ask questions when she woke him. He looked at her face, read it the way he always did, and sat up and started putting on his shoes without a word. She helped him with his jacket, the heavy one, the one with the hood, and she handed him the go-bag to carry because his hands needed something to do, and she needed her own hands free. Thomas' car was at the back door with a set of keys. A black SUV sat in the far corner of the lot, backed in, which meant someone had thought ahead. She stopped Noah in the kitchen doorway. "Hey," she said, "look at me." He looked. "We're going somewhere safe for a little while. There's a woman there named Deb. She's good people. You're going to like her." He studied her face. "Is the man in room 7 coming?" "No." "Is he going to be okay?" She looked at her 8-year-old son asking about the safety of a man he'd known for 48 hours. And she thought about the way Noah had answered his questions at breakfast table 4. The way he'd said, "I don't know yet either." The way children sometimes understood exactly as much as they needed to without needing it explained. "He's going to try," she said. Noah nodded. He picked up the bag. He walked to the back door. She followed him. At the door, she stopped and looked back. Adrian was at the far end of the dining room, speaking to one of his men, his back to her. He didn't turn around. She didn't wait for him to. She went out into the cold dark and got her son into the car. They were 40 minutes out when it happened. Thomas was driving steady and fast on the coast highway, the kind of driving that covered ground without drawing attention. Noah was in the back seat with his head against the window, not sleeping but close, the go bag on his lap. The burner phone was in Maeve's pocket. She was watching the road behind them in the passenger mirror. Clear, as far as she could see, which in coastal dark with no moon meant not very far. Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His face changed. "What?" she said. "Message from Voss." He handed her the phone. She read it. "Car is compromised. Don't trust him. Get out of the car." She looked up from the phone. Thomas was looking straight ahead at the road. His jaw was set. His hands on the wheel hadn't moved. She looked at the message again. It had come from Adrian's number, and she had no way to know if Adrian's number was still Adrian's number. Her right hand moved to the door handle, then stopped. If she bolted from a moving vehicle at 60 miles per hour with Noah in the back seat, she killed them both on the asphalt. If she didn't bolt and Thomas was compromised, she delivered them to whoever was waiting at the end of this road. "Thomas," she said. "I saw it," he said. His voice was completely flat. "Did you?" "Yes." "And?" "And I've been Adrian since I was 18 years old. And if he sent that message, then someone has his phone, which means we need to change our route." He took the next turn without signaling, pulling off the highway onto an unlit access road that cut into the tree line. Or, he stopped the car. Silence. The headlights threw a narrow corridor of pale light into the dark of the trees. "Or," he said again, "I'm compromised and we're somewhere no one can see us, and you should have a plan for that." She looked at him. He looked at her. His hands were on the wheel, visible. He had not reached for anything. "Your call," he said. She looked at his hands. She looked at his face, which was doing nothing. No calculation, no tells, just waiting. The way a man waited who'd been through enough situations like this to understand that rushing them made them worse. She thought about Adrian's face when he'd said, "I've known him since we were 18. She thought about the text, and who sent it, and what they would gain from it. "Keep driving," she said, "but give me your phone." He handed it to her without hesitation. She called Adrian's number. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. She didn't leave one. "Who else has your number?" she said. 3 people, Adrian, Kevin, and a man named Garrett, who's been with the organization for... He stopped. Something moved across his face. Garrett knew about Portland. "Is Garrett one of the 6? "Yes." She sat with that for 3 seconds. "Where's Garrett right now?" Adrian had him on the bluff road perimeter. Thomas's voice had shifted. Still flat, but a different kind of flat, the kind that meant he was running his own calculations at speed. "Adrian pulled everyone in when we left. Garrett would have been in the convoy going north." "Call Adrian," she said. "You just called..." "Call from your phone." He dialed. 1 ring, 2. Then a pickup, and Adrian's voice clipped and immediately alert. "Car? We got a message from your number telling us you're compromised," Thomas said. "We're off the highway. We're fine. Is Garrett with you?" The pause on the other end was brief and terrible. "Garrett left the convoy 12 minutes ago," Adrian said. "Said he had a vehicle issue. He's not answering his phone." Silence in the car. "Get to the location," Adrian said. "Don't stop. I'm going to find Garrett." "Adrian," Thomas started. "Go." And the line went dead. Thomas put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. Maeve sat in the passenger seat with her hand on the door handle she hadn't used and looked at the darkness between the trees and thought about a man named Garrett, somewhere on a coastal road with a phone he'd used to try to separate her from the one person Adrian trusted, and she thought about how close it had come to working, and she breathed through her nose until her hands steadied. Deb's gate was unlocked as promised. The property was dark except for a single light above the porch of a low timber house set back from the road by 200 yards of gravel track. Thomas stopped at the gate, and she got out and went ahead on foot. Because she needed Deb to see her first, and because some part of her needed the 30 seconds of walking alone in the cold air to put herself back in order. The porch light came on when she was 20 feet out. Deb opened the door before she reached the steps. Deborah Kwan was 58, compact and unhurried, with the kind of stillness that comes from a long career spent in situations where panic was a liability. She looked at Maeve, then passed her at the SUV by the gate, and her face arranged itself into something practical and unsentimental. "How many?" she said. "3. 1 child." "Inside." She stepped back. "I'll put the kettle on." Noah was asleep inside of 20 minutes, in the small room off the kitchen that Deb showed them without comment, on a narrow bed with wool blankets. Maeve sat on the edge of it until his breathing slowed, and then she came back out to the main room. Thomas was by the window watching the driveway. Deb set a mug in front of Maeve and sat across from her at the table and folded her hands. "Bad?" Deb said. "Getting there." "You want to tell me the shape of it?" She told her. Not everything. Not Adrian, not the history, but the operational shape of it. The surveillance, Mercer, the leak inside the team, Garrett. Deb listened without asking questions, which was one of the things Maeve valued most about her. Most people, when you told them something alarming, started asking questions as a way of managing their own anxiety. Deb listened until the thing was completely said, and then she sat with it for a moment before responding. "The man running it," Deb said. "Mercer. You said he was a fixer. Former intelligence, then private sector. And he's been running surveillance on you for 3 weeks. That's what I was told." "Then he's not improvising." Deb said it calmly, like she was describing weather. "He has an endgame and a timeline, and this, coming to the end tonight, the vehicles, the cut power, that was never his move. That was a probe." Maeve looked at her. "A probe?" "Testing response. Seeing what Voss had in place. Seeing how fast you'd move and where." She paused. "He already knew he wasn't taking you last night. He was counting how many people stood up when the lights went out." The room felt colder than it had a moment ago. "Then he knows the size of Adrian's team," Maeve said, "and their response time. And the fact that you left in a vehicle with 1 man instead of the full group, which tells him the group went elsewhere, which means he can separate the search." Deb unfolded her hands. "He'll find your man Garrett by morning, if he hasn't already, whether Garrett is an asset or just someone whose phone got used." "You think Garrett might not be the leak?" "I think the message came from Adrian's number, not Garrett's, which means either Garrett took Adrian's phone or someone else did, or—" She stopped. "Or Adrian sent it himself," Maeve said, quietly. "As a test." The room held that. Thomas turned from the window. "He would have told me," he said, but his voice had a question under it. "Would he?" Deb said, not unkindly. "If he was testing whether the message would make you stop the car." Nobody said anything. Maeve sat very still with the mug of tea between her hands and thought about Adrian standing in the dining room as she walked out the back door, not turning around, and whether that had been courtesy or calculation, and whether she was capable right now of telling the difference, and whether the answer to that question even mattered, because she was in a timber house in the Coast Range, with her son asleep in the next room and a man named Roland Mercer somewhere out there who had already made his first move and was waiting to see how they responded to it. Her phone buzzed, not the burner. Her actual phone. The one she'd had for 3 years, registered to the inn, the number on the Tidewatch's website and business cards. Unknown number. She looked at it for 1 full second. She picked it up. "Hello, Maeve." The voice was even and unhurried and belonged to someone who had clearly been waiting to use her name in exactly this way for a very long time. Her stomach went cold. "I think we should talk," said Roland Mercer. "Just the 2 of us, before this gets complicated for everyone involved." She didn't say anything. "I know where you are," he said. "Not precisely, but close enough to matter. And I know about the boy." A pause, so brief it was almost respectful. "I don't want to hurt either of you. I want you to understand that. My problem is not with you, Maeve. My problem is with what Adrian Voss will be able to prove if the 2 of you compare notes." Another pause. "So before he gets the chance, I'd like to make you a better offer. Thomas was across the room in 4 steps, hand out for the phone. She held up one finger. He stopped. What offer? She said. Walk away, Mercer said. Tonight. Take the boy and go somewhere new. I'll give you the resources to do it cleanly. Identification, money, a place Voss can't find you any more than I can. You disappear for real this time, and I have no reason to push further, and your son grows up with a mother. The pause this time was longer. Or you stay in this, and I will be forced to treat the boy as the asset he is. She didn't feel the cold anymore. She didn't feel anything, which she understood was her body shifting into a register beyond emotion because emotion wasn't useful to her right now. How did you get this number? She said. The inn's website, he said. You've been listed since 2019. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was that simple. And she had spent the last 6 hours running calculations about leaks and encrypted lines and surveillance infrastructure. And he'd gotten to her through a contact page on a website for a small coastal inn, the same way someone would book a room. I need time to think, she said. Of course. His voice was accommodating in the way that was worse than threatening. You have until 6 this morning. After that, I begin making different arrangements. He stopped. I'm sorry it came to this, Maeve. Genuinely. You were never supposed to be part of any of it. The line went dead. She set the phone on the table. Thomas looked at her. Deb looked at her. He called my listed number, she said. The inn's website. Deb closed her eyes for a half-second. Thomas made a sound low in his throat. He's offering me an exit, she said. Money and papers and a clean disappearance in exchange for staying out of whatever he's trying to protect. She looked at the phone. He wants me gone before Adrian and I can talk, before I read those letters. Then the letters matter, Thomas said. They were always going to matter. She stood. Where's the envelope? Thomas went to the go-bag and brought it back. She'd carried it out of the inn without thinking, pressed against her chest with the instinct she didn't question. She opened it now at Deb's kitchen table with a cup of tea she hadn't drunk, and a man by the window and a woman across from her who had the particular quality of someone who had sat at tables like this before and understood what the letters inside an envelope could do to the landscape of a situation. She pulled them out. They were not what she'd expected, which was to say she hadn't known what to expect, only that she'd been bracing for them the way you braced for something you needed to be over. They were handwritten, on plain paper, no letterhead. The ink was dark. The handwriting was Adrian's, but she knew it from the years when it had been part of her daily life, and she had not forgotten it the way you didn't forget the handwriting of people who had mattered to you. The first letter was dated 9 years ago, 3 weeks after the night she'd run. She read it, then the second, then the third. She sat with the stack of them in her hands, 22 letters across 8 years, and she felt something happening in her chest that was not grief, and not relief, and not anger, but some compound of all three that she didn't have a word for. He had not let her go. That was the thing. Through all of it, through the years and the distance and the silence that she'd believed was his indifference, he had kept writing, not to send, not because he knew where she was, just because, as the last letter said in language that was characteristically direct and stripped of anything theatrical, he needed to put the words somewhere even when there was nowhere to put them. She set the letters down. She looked at Deb. He's going to get Noah, she said. Mercer. Not tonight. But if I walk away, if I take his offer, he still has Adrian, and Adrian with Noah out there somewhere. Leverage Mercer can always come back to... She stopped. He's not offering me safety. He's offering me a different cage. Yes, Deb said. And if I don't take it, then by 6 this morning he makes different arrangements. Deb said it without softening it. Which means Noah. Maeve looked at the wall. The timber walls of a house that existed on no map that mattered, that she'd found through the chance meeting of a woman at a farmer's market who had looked at her and seen something worth leaving a door open for. She thought about the version of herself that had spent 8 years being careful, being small, keeping her head below every line that might be drawn. She thought about how well it had worked and where it had gotten her, and what was asleep in the next room counting on it to be enough. I need to call Adrian, she said. Mercer may be monitoring his line, Thomas said. Then I need you to get me to him. She looked at Thomas. Not by phone, in person. And I need it done before 6. Thomas checked his watch. It's 3:42. Then we have time. She stood. She picked up the letters and put them back in the envelope and put the envelope in the go bag. But I need Noah somewhere that isn't here. Not because here isn't safe, because I can't do what I need to do and worry about him at the same time. And if I have to choose between those two things, I'll choose him every time, which means I'll never make the choice I need to make. She looked at Deb. Deb looked back at her with the expression of a woman who had been asked things before in the small hours of difficult mornings and had always said yes. He'll be here with me, Deb said, until you come back. If I come back? When? Deb said. Not a correction, a structural decision. When you come back. Maeve nodded once. She went to the small room and she stood over her son, and she looked at him for a long time in the dark. At the particular way he breathed, at the arm thrown above his head, at the face that showed her things she had spent 8 years not looking at directly. She looked at them now. All of them. The jaw. The stillness. Everything she had refused to name. She bent and she pressed her mouth to his hair, and she stayed there for 3 full seconds, which was all she could allow herself, and then she straightened and she picked up the go bag, and she went back out to the main room and she looked at Thomas' car, and she said the thing she had spent 8 years being too careful to say. Take me to Adrian. Thomas drove without headlights for the first quarter mile off Deb's property, navigating by the pale, ambient glow of a sky that hadn't fully decided what color it wanted to be. 4:17 in the morning. Maeve sat in the passenger seat with the go bag between her feet and her hands in her lap, and she did not let herself think about the room where Noah was sleeping, because if she thought about it, she would go back. Where is he? She said. Last position was a rental property 12 miles north of Crestfall. He took 4 men and went loud. I told you he was drawing Mercer's attention north. Did it work? Thomas was quiet for a beat. I don't know. She looked at the dark road. Call him. I've been trying since we left. He's not picking up. The specific quality of that silence was the kind she recognized from the worst moments of the last 2 days. Not absence, but the kind of presence that comes from something you don't want to name. Drive faster, she said. He drove faster. They found the rental property by the smoke. It was visible from a half-mile out, a thin column rising against the pre-dawn sky, darker than cloud, with the particular character of something structural burning rather than brush or garbage. Thomas slowed and killed the engine, and they coasted the last 100 yards to the tree line with the windows down and the cold coming in and the smell of it reaching them before the visual did. A farmhouse set back from the road. One vehicle in the driveway, driver's door open. A second vehicle tilted at the edge of the gravel, one tire blown, nose in the ditch. The smoke was coming from the detached garage, which had a blown-out window and a door that hung at an angle on one hinge. No movement. Maeve had the door open before Thomas fully stopped. Stay, he started. She was already out. She moved low and fast along the tree line, the way she'd learned from watching Adrian's men move the night before, keeping the tree trunks between herself and the open ground, watching the dark windows of the house for any silhouette that resolved into something intentional. Thomas was behind her, and she could hear him but not see him, which was how she knew he was doing it right. The front door of the house was ajar. She pushed it open with her shoulder and went in low and to the left. The interior was dim, emergency lighting from somewhere, a single battery lantern on the kitchen table throwing the room into sharp-edged amber. 2 of Adrian's men were on the floor. She registered them as breathing before she registered anything else, alive, one with a hand pressed to his ribs, the other sitting against the wall with his eyes open and a cut above his ear. The man at the wall looked up when she came in. He's upstairs, he said. His voice was rough. Second door. She took the stairs. Adrian was on his feet when she pushed open the second door, which told her he'd heard her coming and hadn't decided yet whether that was good or bad. He had a phone in one hand and a window at his back that showed the smoke rising from the garage, and he looked at her with an expression that moved through several registers very fast before settling somewhere that she couldn't classify. His left arm was wrong. She saw it immediately. The way he held it, the set of his shoulder. The particular stillness of someone keeping a damaged thing immobile because moving it cost too much. "What happened?" she said. "Garrett." He said it flat, factual. "He wasn't the leak. He was the decoy." She stopped. "What?" "Someone used his vehicle to transmit location data to Mercer. Garrett didn't know. He pulled over because he got a warning light on the dash, and when he got out to check the engine, his phone went dead." He paused. Someone had slaved a GPS transmitter to his car and a cloning device to his phone. When he separated from the convoy, it triggered both. He shifted his weight slightly, and she saw the effort it cost him. "The message you got from my number, sent from a spoofed line using Garrett's cloned device to make it look like mine. Someone who knew both our contact protocols." She sat down on the edge of the bed because her legs made that decision without consulting her. "So Garrett isn't the leak," she said. "Garrett is currently at a gas station 10 miles south, waiting for a tow truck, and completely unaware of any of this." "Then who?" "Kevin," he said. And the word came out differently than any of the others, with weight, with something underneath it that she recognized as the particular pain of being wrong about someone you'd decided to trust. "He's 23, she said. It came out involuntarily. 23 and in debt to the wrong people for long enough that Mercer found the thread 2 years ago and pulled it. Adrian set the phone down on the windowsill. "Kevin's been feeding information since before I found you. He's the reason Mercer knew where I was going. He's the reason Mercer's had 3 weeks on you." A pause. "He's also the reason 4 of my men are currently injured because he told Mercer exactly what defensive posture we'd be in when we came north." She pressed her hand flat on her knee to stop it from doing what it was doing. "Where is Kevin now?" she said. "I don't know." He said it like the 2 words tasted bad. "He left the property before the attack, took a vehicle. He's with Mercer. Or heading somewhere that isn't here. Either way," he stopped, looked at his arm. "Let me see," she said. "It's Adrian." He exhaled. He held the arm out slightly. She crossed the room and she pushed up the sleeve of his jacket and the shirt under it, and what she found was a graze along the upper arm, deep enough to have bled significantly, shallow enough not to be the disaster it looked like. Someone had wrapped it in what appeared to be a torn dish towel, poorly, which was the reason his whole shoulder was doing that compensating thing. "Sit down," she said. "We don't have—" "Sit down, or I'll make you." She didn't say it as a threat. She said it as information. He sat. She found the first aid kit in Thomas's bag. Thomas had followed her up and was in the doorway, taking in the room with the specific scan of someone assessing what needed to happen next. She cleaned the wound with what was available, which wasn't much, and rewrapped it properly, and Adrian sat through all of it without making a sound, which she chose not to comment on. "Mercer called me," she said while she worked, "on the inn's contact number." "When?" 4 hours ago. He offered me an exit. Papers, money, disappear, and he'd leave us alone. She tied the end of the wrap. "I said I needed time to think." Adrian was looking at the side of her face. And I'm here." She smoothed the edge of the bandage. "Which should tell you what I thought." He was quiet. "He has a 6 a.m. deadline," she said. "He said if I didn't take the offer, he'd make different arrangements. For Noah." The quality of the room changed. "It's 5:12, Thomas said from the doorway. 48 minutes. She stood. She looked at Adrian. "Tell me what you have on him. Not what you've told me. All of it." He told her all of it. It took 11 minutes, which was all they had for the luxury of information. Mercer's full operational picture. The shipyard at Portsmouth, a decommissioned cargo facility 7 miles south of Crestfall, which Mercer had been using as a staging ground for 3 weeks based on satellite data Adrian's people had pulled before the convoy north. 2 confirmed vehicles associated with Mercer's organization, seen in the lot on 2 separate nights. A third that matched the description of the blue Ford from the Bluff Road. "He's already there," Adrian said. "He's been there. The inn, the Bluff Road, those were all operations run from that location." "And Noah," she said, "he said he'd make different arrangements. If he can't get to the inn, he'll go to Deb's property." Adrian said it without looking away from her. "If he knows where it is." "He told me he didn't know precisely." He told you that to make you feel safe enough to stay on the phone. He paused. Mercer doesn't make offers he isn't prepared to enforce. She looked at the window. The smoke from the garage had thinned. The sky was beginning its reluctant shift from black toward the particular dark blue that preceded dawn on the coast, the color she knew from years of early mornings at the inn, standing with coffee on the porch before anyone else was awake. She pulled out Thomas's phone. Deb answered on the first ring. Someone might be coming, Maeve said. I don't know when. Is there somewhere on the property? There's a root cellar under the barn, Deb said, completely calm, like this was a call about weather. Off the main structure, old, not on any building survey. I'll have Noah there in 10 minutes. He'll be scared. I'll tell him it's an adventure. A pause. He strikes me as this kind of child who can carry more than you've shown him. She almost said something to that. Thank you, she said instead. Come back, Deb said, and hung up. Done. They were 4 people, Adrian, Thomas, Maeve, and a man named Salas, who'd been sitting with his ribs against the kitchen wall and was now standing in the farmhouse doorway, looking like a man who'd made a decision about what the next hour was going to cost him. The other injured man had been stabilized and was staying put. They had 2 vehicles, one functional. I'm going, Maeve said. She said it to the room, not to any specific person. I know, Adrian said. Don't argue with me about it. I'm not going to. She looked at him. You know the offer he made, he said. If we get there and the situation requires it, if the only way to get Noah clear is to take it, don't. Maeve, don't finish that sentence. She picked up the go bag. We're going to get Noah, and we're going to end this, and you are not going to suggest I make a deal with the man who took 8 years of my life. Do you understand me? The room was quiet. Yes, Adrian said. They went. Yes. The Portsmouth shipyard announced itself through the windshield as a collection of shapes against a sky that was finally, reluctantly beginning to lighten. Massive steel cranes standing against the gray, like the skeletons of things no longer in use. Cargo containers stacked in columns of 3 and 4. Floodlights on tall poles that threw white-yellow light across sections of the yard and left everything between them in deep shadow. The facility covered 12 acres. The access road came off a county route that ran parallel to the water, and Thomas cut the headlights 200 yards out and rolled to a stop behind a stack of containers at the perimeter fence. They sat for 30 seconds, listening. I count 2 guards on the main gate, Salas said. He had a set of small binoculars pressed to his face. Movement near the central warehouse, at least 3 more. Kevin will have told him our standard approach vectors, Adrian said. He was in the back seat, arm against his side. We don't come through the main gate. East fence, Thomas said. There's a section that was cut in a survey photo from 2 weeks ago. Someone's been in and out that way. Mercer's people, Adrian said. Or ours. Either way, it's a door. Or it's where he wants us to come in, Maeve said. All 3 men looked at her. He probed the inn to count our response, she said. He let us run north to see how we moved. He's been watching this entire time. If there's a conveniently cut section of fence... She's right, Salas said. It's a funnel. Silence. Then we don't funnel, Adrian said. Maeve was looking at the yard, the cranes, the light and dark, the containers. She was also looking at her phone. She was looking at the 6 a.m. deadline. It was 5:41. I'm going to call him, she said. Thomas turned around in the driver's seat. What? I'm going to call Mercer and tell him I'm taking the offer. She said it the way she said everything she had decided, without inflection, without the question mark that would have given someone room to argue. I'm going to tell him I'm at the south entrance of the yard. I'm going to tell him I came alone. And when he comes out, he won't come himself, Adrian said. He will. She looked at Adrian. He called me personally. He offered me the deal personally. Men like Mercer, men who've spent 30 years in rooms where other people do the violent work, they need to see the resolution. They need to watch the pieces move. She paused. He'll come. Adrian held her gaze for a long moment. And if you're wrong, he said, then you'll be on the east fence being funneled, she said. So at least you'll have something to do. The south entrance of the Portsmouth yard was a vehicle gate with a keypad, currently open, chain hanging loose and unlatched. Maeve stood in the gravel outside it with her phone in one hand and the go bag on her shoulder and the knife from the pack in the back of her waistband, under her jacket, where she could reach it in one movement. She called the number Mercer had called from. He answered in 2 rings. "I'll take the offer," she said. "I'm at the south gate of the Portsmouth yard. Come alone." A pause. "How did you know I was here?" "Your surveillance van on the Bluff Road had a partial plate, 727. The van is registered to a shell with a Portsmouth address. It wasn't hard." She let that land. "Come alone, or I walk." Another pause. Longer this time. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. She stood in the gravel at the south gate of the shipyard and watched the minutes move. Behind her in the dark, Thomas and Salas were moving along the perimeter in opposite directions. Adrian was somewhere in the container rows to her right, moving slow because of the arm, and she knew he was moving because she knew him, not because she could hear him. At 5:48, she heard footsteps. Roland Mercer was not what she'd assembled in her imagination. 51, medium build, the kind of face that didn't stay in memory, which she understood was a professional asset. He looked like someone you'd pass in an airport and immediately forget. He was wearing a dark jacket, and he was not, as far as she could see, armed, though she understood that this told her nothing about the men she could not see. He stopped 6 feet from her. He looked at the bag on her shoulder. He looked at her face. "You came alone," he said. It was not quite a statement and not quite a question. "I have a son to think about," she said. "That changes the math." He studied her. "Where is he?" "Somewhere safe. He stays there until I have the papers and the money." "Of course." He reached into his jacket. "Slowly," she said. He brought out an envelope, thick. She could see the edge of a document inside. "New identification for both of you," he said. "The funds are in an account. The transfer takes 20 minutes once you give me confirmation." He held out the envelope. "No one has to get hurt, Maeve. That was never what I wanted." She looked at the envelope. She didn't take it. "I read the letters," she said. Something shifted in his face. Very small. Very controlled. "I beg your pardon." "Adrian's letters, the ones he wrote for 8 years. She watched his eyes. "You know what I found interesting? He never blamed you. Not in any of them. He blamed himself. He spent 8 years convinced he'd missed something. Some decision, some moment where he could have protected me better. He never once named you." Mercer was very still. "He didn't know your name," she said. "Not for a long time. And even when he did, he kept those letters private, which means they were never going to be evidence. They were just a man writing to someone he lost." She paused. "That must have been convenient for you." "I don't know what you think I think I know exactly what I'm doing." She reached into the jacket pocket with her left hand, slowly, visibly, and pulled out her phone and held it up. "This call has been recorded and transmitted in real time to a number that will forward it to 3 separate people, one of whom is a former federal employee who still has contacts in 2 agencies. Everything you said to me 4 hours ago and everything you're saying right now is already somewhere you can't get to it." She watched his face go through something. "The offer isn't yours anymore, Mr. Mercer. It's mine." He moved. Not toward her. Away. Sideways, which told her he had people close and was putting himself out of the line between her and them, and she was already moving when she heard it. A shout from the container rose to her right. Adrian's voice, one sharp word that wasn't a word so much as a warning, and then the sound of running, and then the sound of something much louder. She dropped. Gravel came up at her knees and palms, and she hit the ground and rolled toward the gatepost and put the steel between herself and the direction the shot had come from. And she had the knife out and felt immediately stupid because a knife at this range was decoration. But it was what she had, and her hands were not shaking, which surprised her. 2 more shots. Different direction. Then voices. Salas, somewhere in the dark, calling something she couldn't make out. She looked around the gatepost. Mercer was running, back into the yard toward the central warehouse, toward whatever he had in there. She watched him run and made a decision in the space between 2 breaths. She followed him. The interior of the warehouse was cathedral-scale dark, interrupted by work lights on the floor, industrial, throwing everything upward into shadow. She came through the side door that Mercer had gone through and stopped inside it with her back to the wall and let her eyes adjust. Containers inside, smaller ones, stacked too high. A catwalk above running the length of the east wall. Machinery she couldn't identify, old cargo equipment, chains hanging from ceiling runners. She heard him moving, somewhere toward the back. She moved. She kept to the container sides, using the shadow, moving low and fast. She could hear other sounds from outside now. The fight working its way through the yard. Multiple people, multiple directions. She did not let herself think about Adrian. She rounded the last container and stopped. Noah was there. He was sitting on a wooden pallet with his arms bound in front of him with zip ties and a piece of electrical tape across his mouth, and his eyes found her face across the warehouse floor. In the second she came around the corner and she saw, not panic, not tears, but the particular expression she knew from 8 years of watching him read things he wasn't ready for and decide to hold steady anyway. She started toward him. "I wouldn't," Mercer said. He was behind Noah, not touching him, just standing there with the positioning that made it clear what the positioning meant. She stopped. Her knife was in her hand. Mercer looked at it. "That's not going to help you," he said. "I know," she said. Her voice was completely level, which was not an achievement of calm, but of something colder than calm. "But you should know that there are 4 people outside who know you're in here. There are also 6 of mine," he said. "Your math is worse than you think." Noah made a sound through the tape. She looked at him. He was looking at something behind her and to the left, and she understood the look. He was trying to tell her something, the way he told her things when he didn't want to say them out loud, through the kind of attention that could substitute for language. She did not look where he was looking. She kept her eyes on Mercer. "What do you want?" she said. "The recording is already out. The evidence is already moving. You can't stop it from here." She paused. "But I can ask them to slow it down. I can ask for time. If you let him go right now, I can—" "You can't give me anything," Mercer said quietly. "You just told me you already gave it away." "I gave them the call. I didn't give them everything I know about the 9 years before it." She held his gaze. "Adrian told me things. About your methods. About the specific operations. Details that aren't in any file because he never put them in a file. That's worth more to the right people than a recording of one conversation, and you know it." Mercer studied her. Noah made the sound again. She understood then what he was telling her, spasem, not where to look, but when. She held Mercer's eyes. She waited. And then from the catwalk above there was a sound. A single metallic clang, the sound of someone who had come up a back way and misjudged their footing by half a step. And Mercer's eyes went up involuntarily, and Maeve was already moving before his gaze came back down, crossing the floor in 4 steps with the knife low and her shoulder down, and she hit Mercer's midsection with everything she had, and they went down together hard onto the concrete, and she heard him make a sound that was purely air and no intention. And she got her knees on either side of him and the knife at his throat, and she was not shaking. She was not shaking. She was absolutely not shaking. "Don't," she said. He didn't. She looked up at the catwalk. Adrian was up there, holding the rail with his good arm, looking down at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in all the years she had known him. Something that had no calculation in it, no management, nothing held in reserve. Thomas came through the side door 40 seconds later with his hands already moving toward the zip ties on Noah's wrists. Noah pulled the tape off his own mouth. He looked at his mother on the floor with a man pinned under her knees, and he looked up at the catwalk, and he looked back at Maeve. "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice was steady. She kept the knife where it was, and she looked at her son across the warehouse floor, and she felt something move through her that she could not have named if she'd spent the rest of her life trying, but that felt, in its specific way, like the first clean breath she had taken in 8 years. "Thomas," she said, "call it in." "Already done," Thomas said. Outside, through the warehouse walls, she could hear it happening. The sounds of Mercer's men encountering people who had been called in while she'd been on the phone at the south gate. The calls Adrian had been making while she stood in the gravel and waited. The full weight of everything he'd been building toward for 6 months finally arriving at the place it had always been aimed. Mercer lay still under her with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 30 years being the one with the plan and had just arrived at the moment where the plan was gone. The warehouse door opened again, and through it, out of the pre-dawn dark, came the specific sound of authority arriving. Not Adrian's people, not Mercer's people, but the third force that Deb had put in motion 6 hours ago, from a timber house in the Coast Range with a phone call to a number she had kept current for exactly this kind of morning. Maeve looked at the door. She looked at Adrian on the catwalk. She looked at Noah, who was rubbing his wrists where the zip ties had been and watching the door with the expression of a child who had decided the most interesting thing in the room was whatever came next. She took the knife away from Mercer's throat. She stood up. And she put herself between her son and the door and waited for whatever came through it, the way she had always waited, on her feet, facing it with everything she had left. What came through the door was 3 federal agents in dark jackets with the particular walk of people who had jurisdiction and knew it, followed by 2 more, followed by a woman Maeve recognized even in the bad light of the warehouse as someone she had seen exactly once before, at a farmer's market in Crestfall, buying tomatoes. Deb had made more than one phone call. The next 40 minutes were procedural and loud, and Maeve stayed close to Noah through all of it. One hand on his shoulder or his arm or the back of his jacket, the contact unbroken because she needed it as much as he did, and she was done pretending otherwise. Mercer was taken out in handcuffs, with the specific silence of a man who had calculated his options and found them reduced to 0. His people came in from the yard in 1s and 2s, some of them walking, some of them not. And she didn't count them because counting them meant thinking about what the night had cost, and she was not ready for that arithmetic. Adrian came down from the catwalk. He moved carefully, favoring the arm, and he crossed the warehouse floor and he stopped 3 feet from her and Noah, and he looked at them both and he didn't say anything for a moment. Noah looked up at him. "You were up there the whole time," Noah said. "Not the whole time," Adrian said, "but you came up the back way so he wouldn't see you." "Yes." Noah considered this. "How did you know which way was back?" "I looked at the building from outside before I came in." Noah nodded slowly, with the expression of someone filing information away. "That's smart," he said. "Your mother's smarter," Adrian said. She's the one who made him look up." Noah looked at Maeve, then back at Adrian. Something moved through his face that was too complex for 8 years old and also completely appropriate to it. "Are you going to stay?" Noah asked. The warehouse was loud around them. Voices, radios, boots on concrete. But the 3 feet of floor between them and Adrian had a different quality, quieter, like the noise was happening at a remove. Adrian looked at Maeve. She looked back at him. "That's not my question to answer," Adrian said. He said it to Noah, but he was still looking at her. Maeve put her hand on Noah's head. "Go with Thomas," she said. "He's going to take you to get something to eat." "I'm not hungry." "Thomas is," she said. "Keep him company." Noah looked between them one more time with that leveling assessment. Then he went. The agents were finished with Mercer and starting on the yard and the warehouse, and nobody was paying attention to 2 people standing near the east wall, which was the only privacy available. "Deb called them," Maeve said. "Yes. She called me too when you left, told me what route you were taking and what you were planning, and that I should be at the south gate before you were." He paused. "I came in from the water side." "Your arm is fine." "It's not fine." "It will be." He held her gaze. "The recording you made." "Deb's contacts have it, the call from 4 hours ago and the conversation in the warehouse." She looked at the concrete floor. "He confessed to enough between the 2 of them. He was always going to... He needed me to understand why the offer was the right choice. People like that can't help explaining themselves." She paused. "It'll take time to build the full case, but the recordings are a foundation." "Yes," he said. "And the letters," she said. He was quiet. "They're evidence too," she said. "Of the timeline. Of what he did and when. Your lawyers will want them." She looked up. "I'll give them back." "Keep them," he said. She looked at him. "I wrote them for you," he said. "They were always for you." The warehouse was cold and smelled of salt water and old machinery, and somewhere nearby a radio was going through its procedural back and forth. And she stood in it and looked at Adrian Voss and felt the full weight of 9 years trying to land on her all at once, which she did not allow. "Not here," Not in a shipyard at 6 in the morning with her hands still unsteady from adrenaline and her son 40 feet away eating something Thomas had produced from somewhere. I don't know how to do this, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Do what? Any of it. She pressed her hand to her sternum briefly. I've been building in one direction for 8 years. Small. Careful. Everything designed to keep Noah safe and keep the surface of things unremarkable. She exhaled. I don't know how to build in a different direction. You don't have to know yet, he said. That's easy to say. I know. He didn't move closer. He had that quality she'd observed for 3 days now, of being willing to hold his position and let things come to him rather than pressing, which was not what she would have predicted from the man she'd known 9 years ago, and which told her that the years had done something to him beyond the visible damage. I'm not asking you to decide anything today. I'm not asking you to decide anything this week, but you're asking. Yes, he said, eventually, when it makes sense to ask. He looked at his hand, the good one, and then back at her. I'd like to know Noah, if that's something you'd allow. She thought about Noah at the breakfast table, the book report, the unguarded way he'd answered Adrian's questions. She thought about him on the pallet in the warehouse with his arms bound, pulling the tape off his own mouth, telling her I knew you'd come. She thought about the arm thrown above his head when he slept, the jaw, the stillness, all the things she'd refused to look at directly for 8 years. He's going to ask questions, she said. I know. Real ones. He doesn't ask anything he doesn't actually want answered. I'll answer them, Adrian said. The ones I can, honestly. All of them, she said. Honestly. Even the ones that are hard. Especially those. She held his gaze. He deserves the truth. Not the managed version. Not the version that makes it easier. The actual truth, in whatever words an 8-year-old can carry. Yes, Adrian said, without hesitation. All of them. She nodded once. Outside, through the warehouse walls, the coast was beginning to announce morning. The particular gray-gold quality of light that came off the Pacific in the early hours. The kind that made everything look provisional and clean, like the day was still deciding what it wanted to be. She picked up the go-bag from the floor where she'd dropped it. I need to get back to Noah, she said. I know. She started toward the door. She stopped. Adrian. He looked at her. The inn needs a new roof on the east wing, she said. It's been needed for 2 years. I've been putting it off. She paused. If you're going to be in the area... Something moved through his face, very quiet, very contained. I'll look at it, he said. She walked out into the morning. 6 months passed the way months passed when you were paying attention to them. Not fast, not slow, but with the particular texture of time that was being used rather than endured. Mercer's case moved through channels that Deb's contacts navigated with the patience of people who understood that the law moved at its own speed and couldn't be hurried without breaking something. The recordings held. The letters were entered as documentation. 3 of Mercer's former associates, facing their own exposure, provided testimony that filled in the architecture of what he'd built and how long he'd been building it. By spring, there was enough for charges that wouldn't be dismissed, and by the time the Oregon coast warmed into June, Roland Mercer was in federal custody awaiting trial with no realistic path to the other side of it. Kevin pled out in exchange for cooperation and got a sentence that was lighter than it deserved and heavier than he'd hoped for. Garrett, who had spent the night of the shipyard operation waiting for a tow truck and emerged to find his world comprehensively reorganized, came to work the front desk of the Tidewatch for 3 months while Maeve handled other things, and turned out to be surprisingly good at it. The East Wing got a new roof in April. Adrian hired the crew and stayed out of the way, which she appreciated more than she said. Noah asked his first real question on a Tuesday in March, at table 4, with a book report in front of him that he wasn't reading. Adrian was at the counter talking to Garrett about something logistical, the ordinary conversation of someone who had been coming and going long enough that the inn had adjusted to him the way rooms adjusted to furniture. Not without noticing, but without needing to comment. Noah waited until Adrian sat down at the table. Then he looked up from the book report. Are you my dad? He said. The dining room was quiet. Morning light off the water coming through the windows. Adrian looked at him for a moment. Yes, he said. Noah took that in with the particular stillness that meant he was deciding how much of a thing to carry at once. Why didn't you know about me? Because someone made sure I didn't, Adrian said, and because I didn't look in the right places soon enough. But you found us. Yes. Noah looked at the table, looked back up. Are you going to stay this time? If your mother will let me, Adrian said. And if you'll let me. Both of those things matter. Noah considered it with the seriousness he brought to every question that deserved it. Then he picked up his book report and looked at it and said, without looking up, You can sit here if you want. I'm almost done. Adrian sat. Maeve, who had been in the kitchen doorway for the last 2 minutes not breathing, let the door close gently and went back to the coffee that had gone cold on the counter and poured it out and started a new cup and stood at the window looking at the water. The Pacific was doing what it always did in late morning. Moving, restless, light breaking on it in 1,000 places at once, never the same twice, never fully resolved. She had lived next to it for 8 years, and it still surprised her sometimes, the sheer quantity of it, the fact that it just kept going. She heard footsteps behind her, small ones. Noah appeared at her elbow and leaned against her side, and she put her arm around him automatically, the gesture so worn in it required no thought. Are you okay? He asked. She looked down at him. Yeah, bud, she said. I think I am. He leaned a little heavier. Good, he said, with the finality of someone closing a subject that had been satisfactorily handled, and went back to his book report. She stood at the window with her coffee and watched the water move and let the morning be what it was, ordinary and hard-won and full of the specific kind of light that only existed here, on this coast, at this hour, in a life she had built from nothing and protected with everything and was only now beginning to understand was big enough to let someone else into. Behind her, at table 4, she could hear Noah reading aloud. She could hear Adrian asking a question about the book. She could hear her son answering with the confidence of someone who has been told, reliably, that his opinions are worth having. She stayed at the window a little longer. Then she picked up the coffee and went back out to the dining room, and she sat down at the table, and she let the morning continue. The federal agents were still working the yard when the sun came fully up. Maeve stood at the south gate of the Portsmouth shipyard and watched the light change on the water beyond the fence line, the Pacific going from black to gray to the particular hammered silver of early morning, indifferent to everything that had happened in the dark. Her hands had stopped shaking somewhere around 6:30. She didn't know exactly when. She'd noticed them steady at some point and understood that the body had made its own accounting and moved on without consulting her. Thomas brought Noah out at 7. He was carrying a paper bag from somewhere. Thomas had found a gas station, apparently, the kind that sold packaged food and bad coffee. And Noah had a juice box and a granola bar, and the specific expression of a child who had been through something extraordinary and was processing it in the methodical way he processed everything, one layer at a time, without rushing. He came to stand beside her at the gate and looked out at the water. It's big, he said. It always is, she said. I mean, this morning it looks bigger. She looked at it again. He wasn't wrong. There was something about the angle of the light and the after quality of the night that made the horizon feel farther away than usual, the water more present, the scale of things outside human arrangement more apparent than it normally allowed itself to be. Are we going home? Noah asked. Home. The word landed differently than it usually did. The Tide Watch, with its 12 rooms and its wood smoke smell and its wraparound porch, the place she had made from a leaking roof and a handshake deal and 8 years of stubbornness. Yes, she said. We're going home. He leaned against her side and she put her arm around him, and they stood at the gate of a decommissioned shipyard in the early morning of a day that felt, in its specific exhausted way, like the first day of something she didn't have a name for yet. The drive back to Crestfall took 40 minutes. Thomas drove. Adrian was in the passenger seat, arm-dressed properly now by one of the federal agents who'd turned out to have medical training, the bandage white and professional against the dark of his jacket. He didn't sleep. She could see the line of his profile in the side mirror, and she watched it for a while and then looked out her own window at the coast road unwinding, the sea appearing and disappearing between the headlands, The towns they passed through still quiet at this hour. The gas stations and the diners and the tackle shops all closed or just opening, the ordinary world resuming itself without particular ceremony. Noah fell asleep against her shoulder 10 minutes in. She sat very still so as not to wake him and felt the weight of him and the warmth and the specific smell of his hair, which had been the same since he was an infant and which she had always believed was the most reliable thing she had ever known. She thought about what Mercer had said on the phone. You were never supposed to be part of any of it. She had believed it when he said it, which was the most frightening thing about the man, that he could say a true thing in the service of a monstrous one and make the truth sound like an apology. She had been a leverage point, a piece of a calculation. The woman standing closest to the man he needed to control, which made her useful to remove. She had spent 9 years living inside the wreckage of that removal and calling it safety. She looked at Adrian's profile in the mirror. He turned slightly, as if he'd felt it, and their eyes met in the reflection for a moment before she looked away. But the tide watch looked the same. That was the first thing she noticed when Thomas pulled into the lot. The building was exactly what it had always been. Weathered cedar siding and the sign that needed repainting and the porch furniture she'd forgotten to bring in the night before the lights went out, still sitting out there, slightly askew from the wind. It looked like what it was. A small inn on a coast, a place someone had made their life. Garrett's car was in the lot, which meant he'd come back at some point in the night, which she added to the list of things she would be grateful for later when she had bandwidth for gratitude. She got Noah inside and upstairs and into his own bed, which he insisted on despite the fact that it was 8 in the morning and she could see the fatigue in every line of him. He wanted his own room, his own things. She understood that. She tucked him in and he was asleep before she reached the door. She stood in the hallway outside his room for a long moment with her hand on the doorframe. Then she went downstairs. Garrett had made coffee, which she drank standing at the kitchen counter while Adrian sat at the table, and Thomas gave Garrett the shortened version of the night, the operational facts stripped of their weight, which was how people who did this kind of work talked about it afterward, she was learning. The weight got set aside until later, sometimes much later. She listened to the abbreviated version of a night she had been inside, and it sounded almost manageable from the outside, which was the particular trick of narrative. It made sequence out of chaos and implied intention where there had mostly been improvisation and fear. She set down the coffee mug. I need to tell you something, she said. Thomas stopped talking. Garrett looked at the counter. Adrian looked at her. Before the warehouse, she said. When Mercer had Noah, I had the knife and I was watching his face and waiting for the moment. She kept her voice level. I wasn't waiting for the noise from the catwalk. I was going to create the moment myself. Nobody said anything. I want you to know that, she said. I don't want the version of last night where I held on until someone came. I moved because Noah told me to move, because my 8-year-old communicated across a warehouse with his eyes, and I was already going before you made the noise. I want that to be the accurate record. Adrian held her gaze. I know, he said. I was watching. From up there, you couldn't have seen. I could see enough, he said. I saw you go before you had cover. He paused. I made the noise because you'd already committed, and I didn't want you going into a man without any distraction at all. She looked at him. You were always going to get him, Adrian said. I just improved the odds. She picked up the mug again, drank the rest of the coffee cold, set it in the sink. I'm going to sleep, she said. 2 hours. Then I need to talk to whoever is running the federal end of this, and I need a lawyer present, and I need someone to explain to me in precise terms what the next 6 months look like for this case before I agree to anything. She looked at Thomas. Can you make those calls? Already started, Thomas said. Good. She looked at Garrett. Can you manage the desk until noon? Yep, Garrett said. She looked at Adrian last. He was watching her with the expression she had been cataloging over 3 days. The one without calculation in it, the one that had no management in it, the one she didn't have a word for yet. Get your arm looked at properly, she said. Not by a federal agent with a kit, by an actual doctor. Yes, he said. I mean today. Yes, Maeve. She went upstairs. She slept for 3 hours, not 2, and woke to the sound of Noah moving around in his room across the hall, the particular thud and scrape of a child relocating objects for reasons known only to himself. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling of her room, water stain in the shape of nothing in particular in the northeast corner, which had been there since she arrived and which the new roof would not fix because it was from a previous leak, already sealed, just the ghost of it left in the plaster. She knew this ceiling the way she knew everything in this building, every imperfection, every sound the stairs made, and which boards in the hallway would creak, and at what temperature the old boiler started its complaints. 8 years of learning a place until it was part of the way she understood the world. She got up and washed her face and changed and went across the hall. Noah was at his small desk with a piece of paper and a pencil, drawing something she couldn't make out from the doorway. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He didn't look up. "How are you doing?" He thought about it with visible seriousness, which was the thing about him. He never answered "how are you" as a formality. "I'm okay," he said. "My wrists are a little sore." "I know. I'll get you something for that." "It's not bad." He looked at his drawing. "Mom." "Yeah." "In the warehouse." He still wasn't looking at her. His pencil moved in a small, careful circle. "When you came around the corner and I saw you," he stopped. "I knew you were going to do something. I could tell by how you were moving." She came into the room and sat on the edge of his bed. "What did it look like?" He considered the question. "Like you'd already decided," he said, "before you even got there. Like the deciding part was already done." She looked at her son at his desk with his pencil and his drawing and the bruising on his wrists that she was going to put ice on, and she thought about the woman who had arrived on this coast 8 years ago with a duffel bag and a decision. That one too made before she'd arrived, the deciding already done, just the execution remaining. "I want to ask you something," she said. He put the pencil down and turned to face her, which was the thing he did when he understood a conversation was going to require his full attention. "Last night was scary," she said. "The whole night, all of it. And I need you to tell me honestly how you're carrying it, because I am not going to pretend it wasn't what it was just to make you comfortable." He looked at her for a moment. "It was really scary," he said. "When they put the zip ties on, I thought—" He stopped. "I thought maybe you wouldn't know where I was." "I knew." "I know you did. But I didn't know that yet." He picked at a thread on his sleeve. "And then I was thinking. I kept thinking about the guy from room 7. Adrian, because he'd said we were going to be fine, and I was trying to decide if I believed him." "Did you?" "I decided yes," Noah said, "because he said it like it was already true, not like he was hoping." She sat with that. "You were right to believe him," she said. Noah nodded slowly. "He was up on the catwalk," he said. "I saw him when you came in. He was already up there." "I know." "He was there before you were." He looked at her steadily. "He came for us first." She didn't say anything to that because there was nothing to add to it. It was the accurate record and Noah had made it himself, which was what Noah did. He observed the truth and stated it without decoration. And the truth in this case was that a man she had spent 8 years categorizing as an absence had been on a catwalk in a shipyard warehouse before dawn, waiting to make noise at the right moment so she could get to their son. "Is he going to come back?" Noah asked. "Yes," she said. "To stay?" "For a while, and then more. And we'll figure out what more looks like as we go." She looked at him. "Is that okay?" He thought about it honestly, which she had asked him to do and which he delivered. "I think so," he said. "He answers questions right." "What does that mean?" "Like, when I ask him something, he thinks about it first. He doesn't just say the easy thing." He picked up the pencil again. "Most adults say the easy thing." She looked at her son. "Yeah," she said. "He does that." Chase. The lawyer arrived at 2 in the afternoon. A woman named Prescott, that Adrian had apparently been using for years, who came in a car that suggested she billed well and sat at the dining room table with a legal pad and went through the case parameters with the methodical patience of someone who had decided long ago that emotion was a luxury for other people's professions. Maeve sat across from her and answered everything she asked and asked better questions in return, which seemed to mildly surprise Prescott and then stop surprising her. And by 4 o'clock, they had a clear picture of what the federal case would require and what it would cost and what Maeve's specific involvement looked like going forward. It was not nothing. Testimony at minimum. Deposition. The recordings entered formally, a timeline of events stretching back 9 years that would require her to reconstruct things she had spent years deliberately not thinking about. She said yes to all of it. She said it without hesitation, which was its own kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was still working on. The one about whether she was willing to stand up inside the story of the last 9 years or just survive it from the edges. The answer, it turned out, was that she was done with edges. She had been done with them since the moment she'd crossed a warehouse floor with a knife and a dead reckoning and no guaranteed outcome. Prescott left at 5. The inn was quiet. October quiet. The specific stillness of the off-season, the dining room empty and the light going gold through the windows the way it did at this hour, that particular coastal late afternoon gold that made everything look like it was being remembered rather than happening. She found Adrian on the porch. He was sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs she'd forgotten to bring in, looking at the water, his good arm on the armrest and his injured arm held slightly away from his body in the way that meant the doctor had done something to it that required it not to be pressed against anything. He had his phone face down on the armrest, which meant he'd been looking at it and put it away, which meant he'd been waiting for her in the way he waited, without announcing it. She sat in the chair beside him. The ocean was doing its evening thing, the light breaking on the swells in long diagonals, the sound of it constant and low, the smell of salt and cold coming off the water the way it always did at this hour in this season. Neither of them said anything for a while. "Kevin will serve 3 years," Adrian said. "Maybe less." "I know." "Does that bother you?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. He was 21 when Mercer found him. He was stupid and scared and made a choice he couldn't walk back. 3 years is... She paused. "It's not nothing." Adrian was quiet. "What happened to the organization?" she said. "While you were here." "Running," he said. "The way organizations run when the person at the top stops micromanaging. Some things fell apart that should have fallen apart." He looked at the water. "Some things held that I thought would need me to hold them. And now, I've been making arrangements," he said. "The legitimate businesses. There are more than you'd think, accumulated over the years as insulation. They became real without me particularly intending it. Those are in the process of being transferred to proper management." He paused. "The rest is being wound down. Not quickly, but permanently." She looked at his profile. "That's not a small thing." "No," he said, "it's not. What does winding it down cost you?" He turned to look at her directly for the first time since she'd sat down. "Less than I thought," he said. "More than I can calculate yet." He held her gaze. "The parts that cost the most are the people who built things with me and now have to build differently. I owe them more than an exit. So you're staying involved. In the transition. Yes." He looked back at the water. "I'm not walking away and calling it clean. That would be..." He stopped. "That would be the version of this that felt better than it was." She understood that. She had done her own version of it. The clean walk away, the new coast, the careful construction of a life that didn't reference the old one. She understood both the necessity of it and the cost, which was that the thing you walked away from didn't actually stay behind. It just traveled differently. "Noah asked me if you'd come back," she said. Adrian's hands stilled on the armrest. "I told him yes," she said. "I want you to know that was a deliberate answer, not an automatic one." He looked at her. "I'm not telling you it's going to be easy," she said. "I'm not going to pretend the 8 years didn't happen, or that I know how to fold you into what we've made here without it being complicated. It's going to be complicated." She held his gaze. "But I'd rather be complicated with the true version of things than simple with the version I invented to survive." The porch was quiet. Below them, the path down to the small beach where Noah liked to collect rocks was empty. the beach itself visible from this angle, the tide coming in slow and even. "I'll take complicated," Adrian said. "I know you will." She looked at the water. "You've been taking it for 9 years." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one, something that came from genuine, unexpected recognition, the sound of a person catching themselves off guard. She looked at him. He was looking back at her, and the evening light was doing its thing, the gold going orange at the edges, and his face was the face of a man who had been putting weight down one piece at a time for a very long time, and was somewhere in the early stages of understanding that he was being allowed to put more of it down. She did not reach for his hand. Not yet. That was for a different day, a day that was coming but hadn't arrived, and she had learned something about the timing of things in the last 3 days that she intended to keep. That there was a difference between a moment that was right and a moment that was simply available, and honoring that difference was part of what made the right ones mean something. But she stayed on the porch, and he stayed on the porch. And the evening came in the way evenings came on this coast, gradually and without announcement, the light shifting through its colors, and the temperature dropping by degrees, and the ocean doing what it always did, the immense indifferent ongoing of it, which she had learned in 8 years to find not lonely, but clarifying. Below the porch, the path to the beach, and on the path, Noah appeared. He had his jacket on and his pockets full of rocks already, which meant he'd found his way down there at some point in the afternoon without telling her, which they would discuss, but not right now. He came up the path with his head bent against the evening wind and his hands in his pockets, and he stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at them, at both of them, sitting in the chairs that she'd forgotten to bring in, side by side in the going light. He looked at them for a moment. Then he came up the steps, and he went to Adrian's chair, and he stood beside it, and he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out, and held it out in his open palm. A rock. Small, flat, gray-green, smoothed by water, the kind you found on this beach by the thousand. Adrian looked at it. He looked at Noah. "It's for skipping," Noah said. "It's a good shape. You have to release it at a low angle." He paused. "I can show you." Adrian looked at the rock in Noah's palm for a long moment. Then he reached out with his good hand and picked it up, carefully, the way you picked up something that had been offered. "Okay," he said. Noah looked satisfied. He turned and went back down the steps toward the beach, hands back in his pockets, into the evening without looking to see if he was being followed, because he knew he was being followed. Adrian stood from the chair. He looked at Maeve. She lifted her chin toward the beach. He went down the steps. She sat alone on the porch for a moment and listened to the ocean and to the footsteps on the path, and then, distantly, to the sound of her son's voice explaining the physics of a flat stone thrown at a low angle, patient and precise, the way he explained everything that mattered to him. Then she got up and went down the steps too. The beach was cold, and the tide was coming, and the light was almost gone, just a line of it at the horizon. Orange going to red, going to the deep blue that preceded dark. Adrian stood at the water's edge with Noah beside him, the stone in his hand, and Noah was demonstrating the wrist motion with an empty hand, showing him, and Adrian was watching with the full attention of a man who understood that this was not a lesson about rocks. Maeve stopped at the edge of the dry sand. She put her hands in her jacket pockets, and she watched the two of them at the water's edge, the boy and the man, the light nearly gone, the ocean doing its evening work behind them. Adrian drew his good arm back the way Noah had shown him, released the stone low and flat. It skipped once, twice, 4 times, 5, and then was taken by a wave. Noah made a sound of genuine approval. Adrian looked at his hand. Then he looked back at Maeve across the width of the beach in the last of the light, and she looked back at him, and between them was the water and the cold, and 8 years of wrong information, and 1 envelope of letters, and a child who had offered a stone for skipping and walked down to the water without looking back because he already knew how the story ended. She walked to the water's edge. She stood on Noah's other side. The 3 of them stood there while the last of the light finished and the dark came on. The way it always came on this coast, completely, without apology, but with all those stars behind it, so many of them that the sky never went fully dark, just changed what it was lit by. The tide came in around their feet. Noah found another flat stone and put it in Adrian's hand. Again, he said. Adrian threw it. It skipped farther this time. Noah counted out loud. Maeve listened to him count, and to the ocean, and to the wind off the water, and she stood on the beach that she had walked every morning for 8 years, in the dark that she had learned to read, next to the two people who were going to make everything more complicated and more true than it had been. And she felt the cold come in off the water, and she did not move away from it. She stood in it, the way she had always stood in the difficult things, not because it wasn't hard, but because standing in them was the only way through to the other side. And the other side, she had learned, was always worth what it cost to get there. Noah found a third stone. He put it in her hand this time. She looked at it. Flat, smooth, gray-green, the kind the beach made by the thousand. Nothing remarkable about it except that it was the right shape for what it was meant to do. She drew her arm back. She threw it low and flat and true, the way she had learned to do everything, without hesitation, without holding back, with the full weight of what she knew behind it. It skipped a long time before it was gone.